Now I'd like to invite your close attention to Sam as he speaks on the second study, Barak, the hesitant commander. Thanks.
Well, thank you and good evening, brothers and sisters in Lord Jesus Christ and young people. What a dinner. Now's the challenge. Staying awake, and hopefully we'll be able to do that as we look at the remarkable story of how Deborah motivates and encourages Barak. So last class, we saw the background to the story of Deborah and Barak. And in the times of the judges, we saw the times of the judges was a time where every man did that which was right in his own eyes. They weren't using the law as their guide, and as such, they drifted away from God and served idols because they had known that the law wasn't giving them the direction that they needed. And as a result of that, they weren't turning to the judges because there were no judges, because there was a complete lack of leadership as a result of the faithlessness in the parents' generation, who had failed to pass on the passion of the truth to the next generation, and the generation there failed to personalise the truth for themselves. And so they quickly left the truth, and therefore God sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, a man who should never have been there because they failed to capitalise on the destruction of Jabin the first 120 years before. And now he came back with vengeance, and Sisera in his army, who was the chief military strategist, who had put them under total and utter oppression. You know, and I think it's very easy, brothers and sisters, for us to say, and we're just yapping about this over dinner. It's very easy to say, they're under complete oppression for 20 years. 20 years is a long time, right? 20 years is a long time. You know, how hard was it over COVID to go and get food from the supermarket? Well, it was for us anyway. We're putting masks on and, queuing up 2 metres apart, and it was a rigmarole. These guys had 20 years of oppression to walk the goat tracks to get food. It was intense oppression. No food, no trade, too scared to travel, all due to failed leadership of the entire nation, which had completely failed. And into that vacuum, we saw at the very end Deborah, the prophetess, who was providing the sweetness of God's word and the counsel of righteousness. And she stepped up to provide God's message and God's judgments for all Israel. It says in Judges chapter 4, in verse 5, the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. And that's a fascinating thing, isn't it, brothers and sisters? That Israel came to her for judgment. Now, I want you to stop and I want you to think about that for a second. Because who was Deborah? Well, Deborah is called the prophetess. So Deborah is called Deborah, a prophetess, and yet Israel was coming to her because she judged Israel at that time. Now that's a little bit odd, because in Judges chapter 2, what we realise when they failed and when they had challenges, it says that actually in Judges chapter 2, whithersoever they went, the hand of Yahweh was against them. Nevertheless, Yahweh raised up judges. Judges chapter 2 and verse 16. And yet it doesn't appear in this story that God had raised up Deborah to be the judge. In fact, she wasn't the judge. She's called Deborah, a prophetess. Why is she a prophetess? What's going on in the story? You see, I think the answer to that conundrum, brothers and sisters, is that whilst God was with Deborah as she was a prophetess, she was not going to be the saviour that God was going to raise up to deliver Israel. No, in fact, there was another man who God had called to be raised up to be the deliverer of his people, who wasn't doing his job. You see, that even adds more weight, doesn't it, to what Deborah saw the need of going amongst the the nation of Israel, because there was a vacuum and a need, and so all Israel was coming to her. She was judging Israel, but she wasn't the judge. No, Barak was the judge. God had called him, but he was failing to stand up in his responsibilities. Whilst God had already called Barak, due to a lack of courage and a lack of leadership, He'd failed to respond to the call. And we're going to see how Deborah encourages and empowers and inspires Barak to demonstrate this true leadership. So here we go, verse 6. And so she sent, and she called for Barak, the son of Abinoam, out of Kadesh Naphtali. Barak, his name, he's the commander, right? His name means lightning. His father was Abinoam. He's the father of pleasantness, or my father is delight. So he's a spiritual man who was living in a very interesting place. He's from Kadesh Naphtali. And we're given the extra detail because there were many Kadeshes in the land of Israel. It's Kadesh in Naphtali. And Kadesh means, well, the sanctuary, and Naphtali means wrestlings. And perhaps the reason we're given the detail is because Barak of the tribe of Naphtali lived in a sanctuary, and it was more of a sanctuary than most. So what's remarkable about this city, Kadesh Naphtali, is we're going to see a man who was growing up within the walls of a city that was more than just any normal city. And he's wrestling with his responsibilities. Do you know what Kadesh Naphtali was, brothers and sisters? We know from Joshua chapter 20 and verse 7 and chapter 21 verse 27 that Kadesh Naphtali was a city of refuge. A Levitical city of refuge where the priests lived. Oh, that gives us a little bit more insight into this man's background and into his experience that he should have or would have got. See, he was a man who grew up within the walls of a city of refuge, a sanctuary from the world where it was supposed to be full of Levites who were expounding the word of God and the law. You see, and yet Barak here is wrestling with the responsibilities of the calling that God called him to. He was not showing the leadership qualities required of him to lead God's people to victory. You see, we can grow up, can't we, brothers and sisters, in ecclesias where the word of God is expounded with clarity and enthusiasm. But, brothers and sisters, and young people, it has to go past our ears and touch our hearts for us to actually change and mould and grow. See, Barak's wrestling with his responsibilities. You see, he wasn't coming to seek judgment from Deborah either. She has to send a request to him. Look what it says. Verse 6. She sent, and she called Barak, the son of Abinoam of Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, hath not Yahweh Elohim of Israel commanded, saying, well, they're words of fairly strong significance, aren't they? We'll come back to that. Hath not Yahweh Elohim of Israel commanded, saying, go and draw towards Mount Tabor and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and the children of Zebulun? Question. Haven't God commanded them? You know, it's in the perfect tense. Hasn't God already completely asked you to do a job? He's already commanded. What's she actually saying to Barak in this message, brothers and sisters, was a powerful, loaded message to Barak. Think about it. What's she actually saying to Barak? Well, how did she know that God had already said something? Well, she's a prophetess. Barak, pretty confident that God's already told you this. I'm a prophetess, Barak. I know God's already spoken to you about your job. Perhaps she was the one that even delivered it to him, don't know. But she knew that God had already asked him. More than that, God has already asked you. I'm speaking on his behalf. This is a reminder, Barak. And by the way, God's request wasn't a suggestion. Hasn't Yahweh Elohim of Israel commanded? Oh, this was powerful. God's given you a commission, Barak. Ignore that at your peril. And this is from the words of a prophet or a prophetess. Remember Deuteronomy 18, verses 18 to 19? I will raise up a prophet among their brethren, like unto thee. This is God talking to Moses. I will put my words in his mouth. He shall speak unto them all that I command him. And it shall come to pass, Deuteronomy 18, verse 19, it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. It was pretty strong words. If you don't listen to the prophet or the prophetess, you're going to lose your life. And notice the title that she uses, Yahweh Elohim of Israel. Oh, that title was the title of God's memorial name. It's synonymous with the covenants that he'd made to the forefathers of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The title name of the promises, the covenant that demonstrate that he would never forget those. Oh, God's given you a commission, Barak. I ain't going to let you go. It's not an option. What are you doing? And the record wants to paint a picture of a remarkable leader in Israel, but it wasn't Barak. It's Deborah. And look at how she approaches Barak to inspire him to step up and to demonstrate his leadership responsibilities and his role. Here's some lessons for us, isn't it, brothers and sisters? Look at this. What could she have done? Well, Deborah could have, option one, taken control herself. Wow, look, Barak, you can't even captain a one-man kayak, right? So you need to actually, you're just useless. Mate, stand aside, stand away, just forget you've even been asked. Just let me have a go. Look, we can't be waiting. You're too slow. You're not there. Just leave it with me. I've got this covered. I'll get this sorted out. You're just useless. Because she could have taken control. Right, let's get these 10,000 men. Let's get this on the road. Let's get this inheritance seized. Let's get on with it. No, she doesn't do that. You see, and whilst it might have been more efficient, it would have been far less effective. Just wouldn't work. Oh, she could have given him option number two. What's option number two? Oh, let me give you a piece of my mind. She could have given him the tongue bashing. You've already been told once before. What's wrong with your son? I mean, honestly, how many times does God have to tell you before you get going? You're incompetent, man. Pull your socks up. Have a concrete pill. Harden up. Get going. She could have given him a piece of her mind. And it might have made Deborah feel better. But any action from Barak would have been out of fear. She doesn't do that either. Look what she does. Instead, Deborah recognises that God had already called Barak, and she realised that Barak was struggling with the enormity of the responsibility and the task that God had called him to, and so she coaches him. And she uses a simple formula that pretty much all parents use, or ideally use, when working with their children. Look, and it's the way God works with Adam and Eve in the garden. Look at what she does. She calls Barak aside. She sent in calls for Barak. She doesn't have a public conversation in front of everybody. No, she calls him aside to have a discussion in person, in private. First thing. Second thing. She doesn't tell him what to do, does she? No, she asks a question. She phrases a question to understand what the issue is, rather than making an incriminating statement. God does that with Adam and Eve in the garden, doesn't he? What does he do in the garden? Where art thou? What is it that thou hast done? You see, God uses a coaching model to try and help understand. He knew what had gone wrong, but he wants a confession and wants acknowledgement so that they might understand what the issues are to work through the problem. So, see, she questions or frames the issue as a question because she wants to understand what the challenges are that he's facing. And then step 3, she reminds him of his responsibilities and the plan as previously laid out. Look, mate, God's already given you a responsibility and a thing. You need to get on with it. And then she reassures and encourages him that God would be with him. She reassures him. But didn't God say that to go and do this, and that verse 7, I will draw unto thee the river Kishon, Sisera and the captain of Jabin's army with his chariots, and I will deliver him into thine hand? Didn't God give you the message that he was going to deliver you? It was all going to be done? Like, this is all good. Don't worry. God's got to be there to help. You see, she calls him aside in private, asks a question, reminds him of his responsibilities, reassures and encourages him that God would be with him, and coaches him into action by carefully and gently assisting him to be reassured of God's purpose and the need for Barak, therefore, to respond, knowing that God would protect him. And in here, brothers and sisters, lies some fantastic lessons for us when it comes to working with each other. No surprises, is there? You know, inspiring each other, regardless of our circumstances, requires careful and prayerful intervention and action. When working with each other, I think the first thing we have to start with is to never assume anything. Even when you think you might know the answer, asking questions really helps. You see, shooting first and asking questions later, you don't get too many answers from dead people. So not assuming and asking questions is really important. Seek first to understand before seeking to be understood is a really good formula to think. Try and think about that. Let's walk in someone else's shoes. Let's try and understand what's going on. You see, people come from all sorts of backgrounds. Nothing operates in a vacuum. We all have our own experiences. We all have our own challenges and hang-ups and problems that we're all working through or endeavouring to bury. Nothing ever happens alone or in isolation. So seeking to understand the problems so that together we can find the answers has got to be the answer when it comes to challenges in ecclesial life. You see, for Barak, brothers and sisters, he needed reassurance to have someone hold his hand. That was it. I need someone to go with me. It was an easy fix. Can you come with me? Yeah, I'll come. Cool. Can we go now? Yep. It was a simple fix. Barak needed reassurance. That's exactly what happened. See, often the solutions are quite easy once the challenges are properly understood. We can navigate together the way around them. So never assume, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Second lesson, try to be outcome orientated in our discussions. No such word as oriented. Be outcome oriented. You see, prior to any discussion, if we actually took the time to think about what the outcome is that we're actually trying to achieve, that when we're in the middle of conversations, we can keep coming back to, what are we actually trying to achieve with this person? What's the outcome we need to do? You see, Deborah wanted Barak to take the lead and to lead Israel. And so she was outcome-oriented in her conversations. If you can think about how you can achieve the right outcomes rather than how you can win an argument, imagine how much more effective we would be. If we continue to focus on outcomes, we might actually change our approach when working with others. You see, for Barak, if Deborah had whipped him hard, Barak might have gone, but he could have chickened out at the end. So she carefully and deliberately asked questions to solve and understand an issue with a very clear motive, to motivate him and take the lead. That's what we want you to do. That's how Christ works. That's how Christ worked with others. Do you know, it might answer perhaps some things that might be looking on the surface to be totally inconsistent. You know, he works in John 3 with Nicodemus and gives him quite a stern talking to about his responsibilities as being a leader in Israel. You should know these things. Get on with it. And yet, almost a few chapters later in John 8, there's the woman caught in the act of adultery, and he's like soft because he was outcome oriented in the way he worked with people. You see, Christ would work with all the individuals to achieve the best outcome for everyone without compromising the truth. You see, what Deborah was able to achieve by coaching Barak was such that she could help him understand his responsibilities, to show him the need for his leadership, so that he would encourage and that he might motivate all the other people of Naphtali and Zebulun, so that God's purpose might be fulfilled, so that Israel's enemies might be destroyed. She knew what the outcome was that was needed. And so she worked carefully. Do you know, there's also lessons for Deborahs and Baraks. We are always sometimes giving and other times receiving advice. There's lessons for taking and receiving advice. You see, if you're going to do a Deborah delivery, we have to show leadership without needing to be out the front. You see, Deborah's really happy to be behind the scenes and working in private. You see, true leaders truly seek to inspire others to achieve greater outcomes and reach their full potential without any claim of glory or self-fulfillment. You see, for Deborah's, it was about sacrifice and helping others achieve greater potential. And so when we work with others, if we're going to be the one giving advice, let's put the person first that we're working with, so that they might understand how they can become better in their walk in the truth and they might achieve their full potential as God and Christ work in their lives to achieve the outcome of his purpose. And if we're receiving advice, if we're getting Baraks, you see, true leaders will listen to feedback from anyone, any source, doesn't matter who it is. And they listen without bias, and it often comes from their children, from their peers, from their spouse, and from elderly people. We've got to learn to be Baraks and listen to advice because, well, they're always looking to continuously improve, to develop personally. You see, we have to receive advice with an open heart, an open mind. You know, brothers and sisters, imagine what would happen in ecclesial life if we took or received advice that way. Imagine what would be advice if both sides delivered and received advice this way. See, Deborah was a fantastic example of a woman, a prophetess, who, whilst not seeking for glory or preeminence, provided true leadership by seeking to motivate the one that Yahweh Elohim of Israel had called. She sought to inspire him to the task. Do you know, in so doing, she inspired a nation that followed him. You see, it was in this leadership vacuum and with this role, we can now begin to appreciate the title that Deborah gave herself. What was she called? Well, Deborah calls herself in Judges chapter 5 and verse 7. She says that leadership had ceased, as we've already seen. Chief or rulers had ceased until that I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel. You see, Deborah saw herself as the nourisher, the supporter of Israel, the one that showed care, the one that would sacrifice. Isn't that the role that mothers play to provide for the needs of their families? See, she put all of them first beyond herself. She looked after them as a maternal mother, seeking the welfare of her children. This was her leadership style, brothers and sisters, and look at how powerful it was. So now we come back to asking the question, well, why did God call Barak in the first place? Well, Barak was of the tribe of Naphtali, Kadesh Naphtali, right? He was of the area of Naphtali. He'd obviously respected by his tribe, but lacked on this occasion the faith and the courage to call together his tribe to fight Sisera and his army. There was 900 chariots of iron, for goodness sake. It's a nightmare. And he's going to be sent to call the children of Naphtali and the children of Benjamin and 10,000 men. Why? Why was it going to be Zebulun and Naphtali? Well, you see, these tribes were the neighbouring tribes associated in that northern area that bore the brunt of Sisera's campaigns. In fact, most of the surrounding tribes were going to assist in the battle on that occasion. Ephraim, Benjamin, Manasseh, and Issachar are going to be all around the area of that respond to the song and respond to the request to fight Sisera and his army and Jabin, king of Canaan. And the call, by the way, went nationwide to fight, but mainly the tribes that were affected most came. So God had called him because he was a leader, supposed to be a leader, and yet he was struggling with the enormity of the responsibility of the task. How often does that happen in ecclesial life, brothers and sisters? Heaps. We struggle with it. We see that in Timothy. What was Timothy grappling with? With Paul. Paul's telling him, he's the man with responsibility, and he's struggling with the work that he needs to accomplish. Here's Barak the same. Here's Gideon the same in the next chapter on. He's going to have the same challenges. But I want you to see the battle that was being set up and the comparison that God was trying to make. Verse 6. Deborah says to him, look, God's already told you, go, see, get a coloured pencil and link these words, right? Go draw towards Mount Tabor and take with thee 10,000 men, and I will draw unto thee into the river Kishon, Sisera and his army, right? So you go and draw 10,000 men, and I'll draw Sisera and all his men, and we'll have a challenge. We'll set up a challenge, and I'll be with you, and we'll kill him. On the surface, it might appear a good strategy to get up, to take 10,000 men and get to the top of a hill. This guy's got chariots. It might appear to be a good strategy because you can always come down the hill to fight. It's usually a position of authority, but not when you fight in chariots. You know what's remarkable about what God asked him to do? Militarily, it was ludicrous. Mount Tabor. What do we know about Mount Tabor? Well, here's a view from Mount Tabor. I haven't been there myself, so I rely on Google. That's Mount Tabor, and you can see all over the Jezreel Valley. It sits 400 metres high, or those of us that like feet, 1,200 feet. And it's a hill that really is just a cone-shaped hill that rises up at the end of an incredibly fertile Jezreel Valley. It was one of the most outstanding landmarks in the part of Israel because it holds a commanding view all the way down the valley and all the way out towards the Mediterranean and all down the other side to the Sea of Galilee. You can almost see 365 degrees around from this mountain. But however majestic the view, it was a ludicrous position to be in from a military perspective. Why? Well, have a think about this. Sisera and his army had never really been able to capture or get individual people together because they were running through the goat tracks in the back country. And so when Barak comes and pulls together 10,000 men in one place, you can imagine how excited Sisera was. So Barak was to gather 10,000 men and to stick them up on the top of a mountain, totally isolated, totally surrounded, fully exposed and vulnerable to siege, and could easily be cut off from all possible help. That's how ludicrous that decision was. Sisera goes, you little beauty, let's have a go. So why is he told to get up there? Why to get up at the top of Mount Tabor? Well, the answer was obvious. God wanted Barak to learn to trust him. He was going to put him into a position of military challenge that without God, he was goner. And more than that, brothers and sisters, is that from this vantage point, God was going to show and to treat Barak and Deborah and to all his men the grandest military maneuvering ever witnessed by man. 10,000 men were going to stand on top of a hill to see one of the largest parades of might, and then to see them utterly destroyed. From here, Barak was going to witness every chariot, every horseman, every foot soldier that Sisera could muster, a parade which would stretch across the entire Jezreel Valley as he marches to meet Barak. And that he would learn that God would defeat them. Barak's a little bit hesitant, as you'd expect. He's the hesitant commander. Verse 8. Here's Deborah. So Barak says unto her, okay, if thou wilt go with me, then I will go. But if thou wilt not go with me, then I will not go. You see, you colour in that expression, go with me, surely I will go with thee. And so he went, verse 9, with Barak to Kadesh. She went with Barak to Kadesh. And Deborah, it says, verse 10, went up with him. See, they were going to have to work together. She wanted Deborah's presence as God's representative to be with him. It wasn't going to be good enough, as far as he was concerned, that God would deliver Sisera into his hand. He needed the reassurance and the association of having God with him. But by requesting Deborah to go with him, he was revealing his trust deficiency, wasn't he, brothers and sisters? His request for Deborah to go with him was going to come with a trade-off. Because you don't quite trust me, says Deborah, God. Deborah says, verse 9, she said, surely I will go with thee, notwithstanding the journey that thou takest, well, it won't be for your honour. You're not going to claim this victory, for Yahweh shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. The journey's not going to be for your honour. He's going to sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. You see, before, Yahweh was going to deliver him into thine hand, says verse 7. I'll deliver into thine hand, says God. But because you have this trust deficiency, well, the trade-off is going to be you don't get the glory of this battle. He's going to now sell it into the hand of a woman. You see, link those two thoughts and ideas. I'll deliver him to thine hand. No, you've got a trust deficiency. He's going to be sold into the hand of a woman. You see, whilst Barak believed that God would be with Deborah, he failed to understand that God was already with him. And for that, God would show Barak that although he would have 10,000 men, God would ultimately destroy Sisera with the one person that he didn't have, a woman. And God would be with her. God would work with her. He could work with anyone. But because you don't trust me, that's going to be my proof. My proof is that I will work with anyone, says God. It's going to be sold into the hand of a woman. Question. Who do you think Barak thought that woman might be? The answer, brothers and sisters, he thought it would be Deborah. It wasn't going to be that way. 10,000 men on a hill and a woman and sold into the hand, Deborah. And he thought that the victory was going to come from Deborah. And, it's going to come from the one place he'd least expected. And it was going to be a journey. This is a journey of realization and discovery. The journey that thou takest won't be for your honour. It was a journey of him to learn a path of discovery and realization that God would be with him. What started as Barak needing reassurance was going to culminate in incredible faith as he leads his men to victory. It was going to be a journey of faith. But it starts with a question. Will you come with me? And she does. And so they go. Verse 10 says, so Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh, and Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. And he went up with 10,000 men at his feet, and Deborah went with him. You see, it was going to be a community that would go with them. It's remarkable, isn't it? Here's a leader who stands up, and because Deborah's at his side, 10,000 men join forces to go up Mount Tabor. And so they go up with him. And they're on foot, we know that. 5 verse 15 says that they were all on foot. And so verse 11 and 12, Heber the Kenite, which was of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, which had severed himself from the Kenites, pitched his tent in the plain of Zanaim, and which was in Kadesh. We'll leave that verse. We'll come back to that in our exhort tomorrow. They showed Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, was gone up to Mount Tabor. And Sisera gathered together all his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him. So Sisera is sitting at home, and he gets the news, a knock on the door. Barak's gone up in Mount Tabor. He's 10,000 men. You can imagine it. Barak sitting on the couch, feet up, newspaper, right? Coffee in his hand, reading current events. And all of a sudden the news turns up. Barak's gathered an army. They've gone to Mount Table. And you can imagine Sisera slamming the paper down. Bang, you little beauty. And he just grabs whatever he can find and muster. You gotta be joking. What a nutcase. Let's go. And so he's off the couch, quick as a wink. Now's our chance. We can wipe them out once and for all. This is the golden moment. Thank you. Let's go. And the people have been avoiding all the public places. There's 10,000 in one spot. Here he goes. Barak's just committed strategic military suicide, a massive military mistake. And Sisera gathers everyone he can find, all hands on deck. Look what it says. So Sisera, it says, verse 13, gathers together, and here's your key expression, all his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him. And there's your contrast, right? All the people that were with him, here's Barak and all the people that were with him, and they go from Harosheth of the Gentiles unto the river Kishon. That's how long the command was. He gathers everyone he can, everyone on deck. It's going to be a showdown. The showdown was going to happen on this occasion. Barak calls Naphtali and Zebulun. Sisera gathers together. It's the same word in the Hebrew. The calling of the men and the gathering together of his army. They marshal 10,000 and Sisera gathers everyone he can. The ultimate showdown. It was an all-in bet. The winner takes all. All his chariots, all the people with him. Do you know, it's suggested from historians that write about this time, that Sisera would have had, if he had 900 chariots of iron, he probably would have had 300,000 footmen and 10,000 horsemen. 900 chariots of iron, 300,000 footmen, and 10,000 horsemen. You think about this in sight. He's on top of Mount Table, brothers and sisters, watching this parade. And Deborah and Barak and the men of Naphtali and Zebulun are going to witness one of the world's greatest military parades of all time as Sisera and all his army march down the Jezreel Valley to the river Kishon. Sisera, meaning battle array, and here he is living up to his name, arrayed beautifully as he marches down the valley, his eyes transfixed on Mount Tabor, his brilliant military brain working overtime as he hatches a plan to get rid of these pesky Israelites out of his territory for once and for all. And as Sisera and his men reach the river Kishon, look at what Deborah says. Verse 14. Up. Get up. For this is the day in which Yahweh hath delivered Sisera into thine hand. Is not Yahweh gone out before thee? See, this is the day which Yahweh hath delivered into Sisera into thine hand. Yahweh hath delivered him into your hand. And the word is in the past tense. He's already given him. Look at what she says. God has already given him into the hand. Has not Yahweh gone out before thee? What did she mean by that, brothers and sisters? Hasn't Yahweh already gone out before thee? Well, here's what Deuteronomy 9 verse 3 says. Well, have a look. Deuteronomy 9 verse 3. Turn it up. Here's what God said, or Moses said about what God would do. Deuteronomy 9 verse 3. Look what it says. Hear, O Israel, verse 1, thou art to pass over Jordan this day to go and to possess nations greater and mightier than thyself, cities greater and fenced up to heaven, a people great and tall, the children of the Anakim whom thou knowest and of whom thou hast heard say, who can stand before the children of Anak? Understand therefore, says Moses, that Yahweh thy God is he which goeth over before thee as a consuming fire. He shall destroy them. He shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out and destroy them quickly, as Yahweh hath said unto them. What does she mean, brothers and sisters? Hasn't Yahweh already gone out before thee? You see, I think, brothers and sisters, is what Deborah was saying was, well, as Moses had instructed that when they were about to pass over to the promised land, they would realize that Yahweh would go and destroy them, and they already had. God had already destroyed them. Therefore, so shalt thou drive them out. Yahweh already has done that. Today's the day. You've got the opportunity to finish the job. You can go and do this. This is the opportunity that your parents' generation failed to capitalize on. That's the job. God had already taken with Joshua in the military campaigns. Now you can finish it because they didn't, says Deborah. Get going. You see, this was their opportunity to finish the job that their parents had failed to do. Get going, she says. Yahweh's already gone out before thee. This is now your chance to finish it. So perhaps that's what she meant. And there's another way in which I think she meant. You see, because Yahweh had physically gone out before them. God was going to witness and show Barak exactly what was going to come up and destroy them. You see, because as Sisera and his men rolled down that valley, they wouldn't see what was coming up behind them. Because behind them, Barak and his men could witness a huge storm brewing, so that the dust cloud of Sisera's army paled into insignificance as the bank of storm clouds raced up the hill country of Judah. And as Barak and his men charged down from Mount Tabor, the storm that was coming up behind Sisera and his men knocked them off their feet and exploded with terrifying force. Look at what it says. So Deborah says, so Barak went down from the Mount Tabor and 10,000 men after him, and Yahweh discomfited Sisera and all his chariots. Well, what was happening behind him? What was the discomfort? Well, turn over the page of Judges chapter 5 and look at verse 20. So the kings came and fought, verse 19, then fought the kings of Canaan in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They took no gain of money. They fought from heaven. The stars in their courses fought against Sisera, and the river of Kishon swept them away. The ancient river Kishon, O my soul, he says, thou hast trodden down strength. And what happened on that day was that the rain and the hail fell in torrential proportions, with the force of the wind blowing horizontally into the approaching army like lightning bolts, completely destroying them and blinding them. The sky was filled with flashes of forked lightning bolting across the heavens with thunderous explosions as God revealed his presence, a piece of his majesty. We know that. Look what it says in verse 4 of Judges chapter 5. Yahweh, when thou wentest out of Seir, when thou marchest out of the field of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dropped, the clouds also dropped with water. It looked so much that the mountains melted from before Yahweh, even that Sinai from before Yahweh, Elohim of Israel. You see, if they'd been alive at the time of Mount Sinai, in Exodus chapter 19, it would have all felt familiar, says Deborah. It would totally be deja vu. You see, the earth would tremble. It was made like waves. The word translated as the word to shake or shook. It was like an earthquake, but it was moving like waves. Right? It was just water moments, and the heavens just dropped. The thunder and lightning would descend. The clouds would just drop and melt water to the point where it looked like the mountains were just melting, overflowing. The rain just bursting from the hilltops. You see, and just like in Exodus chapter 19, and verse 16, when the Israelites were terrified, and Moses says in Hebrews 12 verse 2, I exceedingly feared and quaked, his knees knocked together for fear. So was the battle of epic proportions as Yahweh unleashed upon Sisera and his men a torrent of his water and his majesty as the heavens exploded in their face. And so it was that as Barak and his men tore down Mount Tabor, Yahweh unleashed his rage upon Sisera. And you know what it says? Look what it says, verse 15. Yahweh discomfited him and all his chariots. So that's a fascinating word to use, brothers and sisters, young people. He discomfited him. Do you know word? Means to put into commotion. to put into total disarray. What did Sisera mean, brothers and sisters, young people? Sisera meant battle-like array. This was the man who was the military strategist, who put everything in order, and God just totally undoes him. Puts him into, discomforts him, put into complete disarray, and Sisera is totally outclassed. So how did this happen? Well, I'll just read an excerpt that I wrote, because I like to just sort of get descriptive and to sort of paint the picture, if you hadn't worked that out. Sorry about that. It's the Greek. Here's piecing together Judges chapter 4 and Judges chapter 5. And I just want you to just close your eyes for a minute, or just maybe stare at the screen in the picture and just think about this as you get the story. So the storm system, as it approached Mount Tabor, just burst open. Torrential rain cascades down, rapidly turning the entire area into a complete mud bath. As Sisera and his chariots and his horsemen marched forward, the cloud burst, accompanied by hail, driven by the wind, screamed straight through the advancing hordes, forcing them to slow. Meanwhile, the water cascades off the hill, continues to stream down the mountains and into the valleys, which then begin to flow together and flood the plain, and Sisera and his chariots sink into the rich, fertile soils of Jezreel, unable to move forward anymore. The lightning thunder and the earthquakes completely spooked the horses, causing them to rear up and bolt in their terror, and in their madness they thrashed about, slipping out of their harnessing, tangling themselves into such a mess. Halters, bridles, saddles, everywhere. In panic they trampled soldiers, footmen, themselves breaking bones and killing the men and themselves. And now Sisera and his army stands still. What was a moving motion now stood still, and it's at that moment Barak and his men hit them with full force. And the battle is hand-to-hand combat, and it's every man for himself. This whole battle now is on foot. And still the floodwater came. As Sisera's men turned to flee, the mud slows their retreat, and Barak and his men, hard on their heels, gave chase. And so in verse 16 it says that Sisera and his men fled for home. Barak pursues after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles. And all the host of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword. There was not a man left. They fled for Harosheth of the Gentiles. Thompson's Land in the book says this, that as they scattered, fleeing for home, they raced back down the Jezreel valley, following the river. And on their right hand, your right hand, was the swollen river Kishon and the marches of Thora. They had no alternative but to make for a narrow pass which would take them by the river unto Harosheth. The space, however, becomes more and more narrow until within the pass there's only a few rods wide, only 20 meters wide. And the horses and whatever was left of them and the remaining men all mixed in this horrible confusion, jostling and treading one another down as they raced for Harosheth. The river, obviously deeper and swifter than anywhere before, runs zigzagging from side to side of the vale, just up until it reaches the castle of Harosheth, where it dashes itself up against the perpendicular base of Carmel and around the corner. And there was absolutely now no longer any possibility of avoiding it. Rank upon rank of flying hosts plunged madly into the river, causing those behind it crashing deeper and deeper into the tenacious mud on the banks of that river. And there they stuck fast, overwhelmed, and are swept away by their thousands. Deborah sings, the river Kishon, she says, oh, that river Kishon swept them away. The river Kishon, O my soul, thou hast trodden down strength. Judges 5 verse 21. You see, that's how God would go with them. And so complete was the devastation and the destruction. Verse 16 says that there was not a man left. And you cannot miss the parallel to Joshua 11, can you? That's what Joshua had done with Jabin, king of Canaan, number 1. And here on this battle, they took out Sisera and all his men, and there was not a man left. Not until one man left. His entire army, everything he had, chariots, horses, everything, wiped out. Judges 11 verse 8, put that in your margin. They smote them until there left none remaining. Do you know that was the promise? That was what was required of them. Deuteronomy chapter 20 says that, but of the cities of these people, which Yahweh your God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth, but thou shalt utterly destroy them. And so they finish and fulfill exactly what Moses had asked on this occasion. They took the opportunity, brothers and sisters, to finish the job. Barak and his men knew that the only reason they were having to fight them now was because their parents had not. And so they wanted to complete the mission. Their parents had failed so many years before. So, brothers and sisters, that's the lesson from tonight, isn't it? You see, true leadership is outcome-oriented. And more than that, it has both the vision and the tenacity to see things through to the end. See, we have to become completer finishers in the truth. Leadership is not demonstrated by starting something in earnest, but finishing it as well. You see, it requires us to follow through with the discipline and the tenacity on resolutions that we make long after the spirit in which we made those resolutions has passed. That's true leadership, isn't it? A completer finisher. It's easy to give up, but to do that and to finish, we have to look at why we decided we needed to do things and finish the jobs we begin. It's too easy to give up. We've got to not only win each battle, but ultimately we've got to keep our focus and attention in order to win the war. But brothers and sisters and young people, whilst it says that there was not a man left, or that there was only unto one, not everything was destroyed. One person had positioned themselves for a rapid retreat, just in case things went wrong. Sister was a brilliant military strategist. Always had plan B, the escape plan. But brothers and sisters and young people, God had prepared something extra special for Sisera. And his destiny awaited as he exited stage left. Do you know why, brothers and sisters? Well, God had pegged him for destruction and he got completely nailed.